Democrats have floated a number of options to challenge President Trump's emergency declaration to build his wall along the southern border. But senior White House advisor Stephen Miller said on Sunday the president is ready for a fight as well.
If they pass a resolution of disapproval, will the president veto that, which would be the first veto of his presidency?
Well, obviously, the president is going to protect his national emergency declaration, Chris.
So, yes, he will veto?
He's going to protect his national emergency declaration, guaranteed.
Joining me, Democratic Congressman Adriano Espaillat of New York. He's the whip of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So lawsuits are being prepped in a number of states. There's also the ACLU that is going to be suing the president. What are congressional Democrats going to be doing?
Well, the first thing is that this is a fabricated emergency. We've seen how since the year 2000, migration across the border has dropped 80%. While we doubled the enforcement efforts at the border. So we've got double the number of Border Patrol, and we witnessed a drop in migration across the border.
We report that day in and day out. We report the facts, the statistics, the numbers. The president's not listening. Congressional Democrats come out and recite these facts. I mean, everyone does.
Well,
the president's not listening.
Listen.
So what are the? I know he should listen. What are you going to do in order to assert your authority? And do you think you're going to have?
I think we're going to pass that resolution. I think that the Republican rank and file members of Congress, of the Senate and the House of Representatives, should be concerned about the president's attempt to usurp the power that is invested in the Constitution for us. I think that declaring an emergency goes way beyond border security. It gives the president extraordinary powers.
Like what?
Well, but he has the powers to freeze bank accounts. He has the Brennan Center says that he has to report periodically to Congress and stipulate specifically what are the emergency powers that he's going to use. So this is not some willy-nilly action that he's just going to go to the border and increase the number of Border Patrol. It gives the president really broad, extraordinary powers.
Do you think he's going to use any of those other authorities?
I wouldn't put it past him. He's fabricated already a crisis, an emergency at the border. Why we would believe that he would not resort to using these extraordinary powers that will grant him a broader range of powers to impact the American people.
A number of Republicans have said on the record that they don't believe the president should do this. Are you confident those same Republicans will not only vote for this resolution, but then vote to try and overturn the president's veto, which will sure to come as well?
We'll get to the veto when we'll get to the veto if we get there. But I'm sure that Republicans in the Senate are concerned about this, as are Democrats in the House.
Why are they concerned?
Because these are powers that are vested in the Constitution to have a balance in government, and the president has used them off his cuff quickly without no real emergency, and we should all be concerned about this action.
When Nancy Pelosi warned Republicans the other day that Democrats could use this same power to say, I don't know, say that there's a national emergency on gun control, on guns. And there are a number of Americans who would scream out, yes, there is a national emergency on guns. Look what just happened in Illinois. A number of workers at a factory murdered. Remember what happened in Parkland with all those high school students.
Well, there's a national emergency.
Look what's happening in Chicago on the streets every day.
Global warming as well.
So, but what did she pick gun control and guns specifically to put the, fear in the boots of Republicans? Was she really trying to scare Republicans with something that Republicans have refused to vote on?
I don't think our leader, Nancy Pelosi, although she is satin and steel, I don't think she goes around.
She's a smart lady.
Yeah, I don't think she goes around threatening people. She's shown that many times. What I think she's saying is that guns, right? The violence in guns in general in our nation is a deeper emergency that's far beyond a border fabricated emergency.
If there's a Democratic president, would you support that Democratic president declaring a national emergency on guns?
I support a process. I support a constitutional process that will ensure that there is a balance, that there is accountability in government, that all Americans could feel ensured that the Constitution will be respected.
A national emergency on climate change, because the process might not be fast enough.
That's a very serious problem that I'm very concerned about. I support the Green New Deal, but I believe in a process. I don't think that we should violate the Constitution. I don't think we should reinterpret the Constitution just to take advantage by us or by the other side of the aisle.
Sets, you're going to say, no, we shouldn't do that.
If the president resorts to having an emergency in the border, that's fabricated by him, given the numbers that I just told you earlier. We will oppose it. If he vetoes it, then we'll try to overturn the veto.
But if the precedent is set and the courts uphold him, and they're screaming at me to go, would you say in the future we're not going to use the same authority?
Well, if the courts uphold it, then obviously it is constitutional, and then the doors will be open for any future president to use that as well.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.